Right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your welcome. I just want to say well done to Woodlands, to the team that's pulled this together. And I was just chatting to Andy beforehand, and he sort of said with a bit of a smile on his face, "We beat HTB to this." And I think that's fantastic. You've beaten, I think you have. And really, I've been longing for events like this where, as the body of Christ, we come together and wrestle with what it means to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God as we serve the poorest in the world. And I don't think I've never stood in front of a group of people in a conference like this in the 8.5 years I've been leading Tear Fund. The only place it really happens is either sometimes preaching, where somebody like me tries to get the message into the sermon on a Sunday service to people, or maybe people go off to Oxford Brookes University and study. But this is what we should be doing. So I hope this is the first of many such events, and well done for getting there first. Right. Let me start with a story. A quick story. The great blessing I have at Tear Fund is I get to travel all over the world. Sometimes when I first joined, I sat in the office with a globe and I span it. And I said, "Where do you want me to go, Lord?" And I go like this, and I think, "Oh, where is it this time?" And that's the great privilege of working at Tear Fund, because we're working all over the place. And my last travels were to Myanmar, just before Christmas. And I went and traveled and visited local churches that we've been working with there within the Myanmar Baptist Convention. And I wrote a blog while I was there, and forgive me for reading from it, but I've expressed it much more clearly there than I suspect I'd do recounting it now. But I was stunned by what I saw there. Local churches in a country where there are not many local churches in comparison with the whole country. The picture behind is a place called Tangi in Myanmar. It's a small village. And let me just read to you what I wrote within a few hours of visiting this local church. So yesterday was a long, long day of travel, a good 9 hours in the car and worth every moment. Alison, Alan and I, our country rep, we're visiting local churches that have been through the Eden process of church and community mobilization. Through practical Bible-based teaching and facilitation, this process empowers local churches to love and serve their communities in a host of very, very tangible ways, sustainably and without any kind of dependency on external funding. They developed the Eden process using resources that we shared with them. We were very encouraged by what we saw and heard from Pastor Aung Zaya's local church in Tangi. And this is the local church. This is some of the congregation that gathered to share their stories. And the pastor explained, just 2.5 years ago, only 3 to 4 adults and a couple of children attended church on Sunday. That's the church building behind. A number of the members of the congregation said, "We were disunited and had no understanding of how to work together or of the Bible. Everything changed with the arrival of this process." Through the process, and especially through Bible study, they began to work together, believing and trusting, said one of the congregation, that God is with us. They prioritized education and livelihoods, identified many resources already at their disposal, and then took action. And 2.5 years later, I was there to see the fruit, and it was stunning what I saw. So education, literacy levels were incredibly low, so they started a daycare centre for the whole community, served by volunteers from the church, which runs daily for 6 hours. They started a mini library where they gathered lots of resources to share with the community for reading and learning. They started a supplementary tuition programme that runs every evening from 6 to 10 p.m, still staffed by volunteers from the church. Livelihoods. So they thought, well, we've got to invest in livelihoods. So they learned all sorts of skills from staff on how to produce biofertilizer, bamboo vinegar, and this knowledge enabled them to massively increase their agricultural productivity. They started praying much more seriously. So the pastor was reflecting that the church bell used to only ring for funerals. And now every day at midday it rings as a call to the community to pray together for everything that's going on. And they now have a cycle, 1 day a week of 24/7 prayer. And the most amazing thing is this drive that I took into this community. 9 hours later, we got to the end of the road, and then we had to get off our car, and I was sitting on the back of a motorbike. And then we went for another hour on the back of a motorbike. And for a good half of that way, a good chunk of that way, we traveled on a narrow concrete strip. And I thought, that's incredible. Where did this concrete strip come from? Which actually made it a very smooth ride. And I've been on a few motorbikes in some of these few areas, and often it's horrendous what you have to get to these communities. And I discovered that it was this one little local church had galvanized the whole community to save money to build this strip to enable access to markets, community, and so on. And it was all this one local church. And the stunning thing is the congregation is growing. That's just part of the congregation now. There's 16 families. They're all very actively involved. People have come to faith. They're all involved in every aspect, and their impact on the wider community of 150 families continues to grow. Now, that's one local church. In a moment, a bit later on, I'm going to tell you how many local churches we think there are in the world. But Tearfund's vision, what we've tried to put in front, and the thing that captivates my imagination, gets me out of bed every morning, is imagine 100,000 local churches like that one. What impact that would have on our world. And remember, the only input we gave to this local church was facilitation. They did it all themselves. Well, they would say God did it with them. Stunning. So that's really what I want to talk about today. So can you hold that story at the back of your mind? One local church. There'll be a few more stories coming in just a moment. So what I want to briefly run through in the 25 minutes I've got left is 3 big questions that have captivated me, that I think the world's development efforts do not have good answers to. I think they're 3 of the biggest questions. 1 missing ingredient, which is why these questions are never badly answered. And just a few reflections on what this means for us, people who love Jesus and want to do something about poverty and injustice in the world. Let me start with my first question. And I think this is the most important of all. What is the goal of development? It's a fairly basic one, isn't it? We're all passionate about human development. But what actually is the goal we're working towards? So a few years ago, I traveled to Zambia, and I went to live with a lady living with HIV and AIDS on my own. All I had was a bottle of water, a Bible, a notebook, and a mosquito dome. And it was just to live with her and see things from her perspective. And I was challenged by the physical poverty, but I was stunned by the life and the laughter and the community and the relationships that were strong there. And then just a week later, I was in Newcastle visiting one of the projects we've been supporting there, and I walked into a lady, one of the people this church-based project was working with, and it's all about it's a program trying to get children 14 to 16 back into school who have dropped out of school. I was visiting the mother and the family and home of one of the clients of the program, the children. I walked into this front door. I met the mother. The father was not there. He'd left. I walked into the front door. There was a 48-inch plasma TV screen on. Wherever I looked, there were gadgets. The lady that I was with she was, I'd say, fairly overweight. The whole family was fairly overweight. They clearly were not short of stuff. But I tell you, the oppression, the depression, the hopelessness there was infinitely greater than what I saw in Zambia. What is the goal of development? I was in the House of Lords a few years ago listening to one of the top development economists. And essentially his message to us as the keynote speaker was, the goal of development is economic development. Full stop. I thought, well, is it? Let me give you another story. Jeffrey Sachs, hopefully many of us have heard of him. He's probably the best known, brilliant development economist. He wrote a book called The End of Poverty. He's the architect, or seen as the architect of the Millennium Development Goals. Jeff Sachs wrote a book a few years ago, again, this book, End of Poverty, and in it he characterizes the goal of development in this way. The goal of development is this. The goal is to take all of those we're serving, people in poverty, and get them to take the first step on the ladder, on the first rung of the ladder of economic development. And the assumption is, of course, you climb up this ladder and you pop out in North America today, or in Newcastle today, and everything's fine, isn't it? Now, of course, economic growth is essential. It's absolutely vital, but it is not the goal. It is not the highest goal. What is the goal? If we think economics is the goal, we shape all of our interventions to align with that goal alone. But if there's a higher goal, what happens is we end up compromising and trading off things. So is the goal economics and physical development alone? Or is there something more? Relational needs. So actually the goal of development surely is, yes, economic needs must be met, physical needs, but crucially relational needs too. Relational, social, emotional, and we as followers of Jesus would say spiritual too. Or put another way, the economic and physical needs are very much about escaping that absolute material poverty, but what we really long to see is that all down the context of strong relationships and deep self-worth. I'm going to come back to this a bit later on. Let's think biblically for a moment. The biblical vision of life in all its fullness is about restored relationships, isn't it? Shalom. That's the goal of development. It's restoring relationships with God, with ourselves, with our neighbor, and with creation. You know, I love the words that were just read out, Andy just read out from Isaiah 58. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring where waters never fail. Or John 10:10, I have come that it's all about life in all its fullness. That's the goal. Dusting off the fact that we are made in the image of God. That's the goal. It's not to make us into consumers. It's not economic growth alone. And we have to keep that front and center, because when we really wrestle with it and bring it front and center, it changes every way we work. More of that in a moment. So that's the first big question I want you to think about. Now, let's just see. Stop. Very good. No. It's a very sensitive key. There we go. Second big question is, what is the key to sustainability? How do we get real sustainability? This has been, I would say, forgive me for the pun, the holy grail of development. It's how do you get to truly sustainable development that is no longer dependent on outside intervention? Remember my story of the Tangi church in Myanmar. A bit of an intervention, but then you step back. Acts chapter 2, the fellowship of the believers. I love this passage because for me, this is the epitome. This is a sustainable community. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. This is Acts chapter 2, 42 to 47. Everyone was filled with awe. Many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anybody who has need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added daily to their number those who were being saved. That is an amazing image of a sustainable community. Tear Fund was not supporting that local church, that prototypical local church. No outside agency, no outside government was. Yet, within 300 years, local churches had spread across the whole of the Roman Empire, and even the Roman Emperor himself had succeeded to the gospel of Christ. I think we need to reimagine and rediscover a confidence in the transforming power of the gospel and bring it center stage again, because it is the key, I think, to this question of sustainability. Robert Chambers, those many of us probably know, has often said, he wrote this brilliant book called Whose Reality Counts. And he has passionately advocated for years as a secular development economist that many of us have all read. Any one of us who've actually been through a formal training program will know about Robert Chambers. And he says the key to sustainable development is participation and ownership by the community. The big narrative that floats around professional development experts these days is that of resilience. How do we build community resilience that is no longer dependent on outside intervention? The challenge is there's very few models out there. It's really difficult doing resilience, really empowering the community, having the wisdom of outsiders to step back. It's really difficult. In fact, many organizations, they recognize the importance of this. And what they do is they say, what we need to do is recreate local organizations that are passionate about justice, that are full of compassion, that will be there when all the aid organizations have gone, because that is the key to sustainability. Now, you might just be thinking, doesn't the local church meet that bill? Come back to that thought in a moment. When I was in Ethiopia last year, and I took some of the new wine leaders to come and see the work of local churches getting mobilized and how breathtaking it is. And I really think they were stunned by what they saw. And this is Tom and Margaret, but I met many people there. I haven't got time to tell their story, but the thing that was remarkable about these local churches that we met there was that they made me realize I was truly seeing sustainable development, maybe for the first time. So I first visited some of these communities about 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And they now have made me, I have now a test, and I wonder whether you should develop a test too. How do you know, when you're out there at the front line, whether or not you are seeing truly sustainable development? How do you know? Well, here are my 2 tests. I offer them to you. My 2 tests are these. If I turn up in a community and nobody asks me for anything, yet they are doing amazing things, but nobody asks me for anything, because everybody knows I'm a white man, I've come from I've got the money, I'm from Tier Fund, but they don't ask me for a thing, then I know I may well be in sustainable development. I may well be seeing sustainable development. Here's my second test. Nobody thanks me for anything. Now, how many of you have been, you turn up in these places and say, oh, thank you so much, Tier Fund, thank you so much, thank you for everything you've brought, thank you, you're wonderful, because they're all saying, well, we've got to be really thankful because, they are thankful people anyway, but because they're thinking, well, hopefully something more will come if we keep thanking them. But nobody thanked me in this community. Nobody asked me for anything. That doesn't mean they were delighted to see me, because they wanted to tell me their story. They wanted to show me what was going on. They wanted to inspire me. But in this community, in these churches, and similarly the one I spoke about, Tangi, in all the churches I've been to, nobody thanks me anymore. Nobody asks me for anything. They don't ask me because they already know how they're going to have their needs met. They don't thank me because I'm not the person to thank. They are the person to thank. On the walls of many of the communities here, they have thank God for God, thank God for PEP, the process they went through, blazoned on their walls. They're thanking themselves and they're thanking God. Isn't that stunning? And that's what you'd expect to see with sustainable development. I haven't got time to tell you Mensuret's story, so come and ask me later. Not quite there yet, there we go. The third question, so first question, what is the goal of development? Second question is, how do we see truly sustainable development? Third question is, the last mile of delivery, or how do we get reach? How do we reach down into the last mile? Okay. So in Zambia, going back to Zambia again, when I was living with this Grace, with my mosquito dome, living with her, and she was living with HIV and AIDS. The challenge in Zambia is not with supporting her. All the antiretroviral drugs are available 50 miles away in the hospital. The challenge is not the drugs. The challenge is how do you take one person in a community and take them through a process, take grace, so that she has enough confidence to overcome all the stigma around living with HIV and AIDS, to go for voluntary counselling and testing when she's already lost all of her resources trying to cope with illness. She's then accompanied to the hospital. Who's going to take her? Who's then going to mediate and provide all the home-based care and the love and support for her as she goes through treatment? Who's going to do all of that? Who's going to love her through it? Who? Because otherwise she'll never access the drugs down the road. She won't get anywhere near them. There's this challenge of last mile of reach. There's two challenges here. One is geographic reach. It took me 9 hours to get to Zambia, and that's actually quite easy. Some of these communities are really hard to reach, or in the middle of urban slums, it's really difficult to get to some of these places. How do we have the kind of reach that spreads across the breadth of 2 billion people living under $1.50 a day? But the other challenge around reach and last mile of delivery is how do you reach down, and change a human heart? Many of you will know, I suspect, and certainly when I speak to people I trust and know who are much better, much more knowledgeable about development than I am, they will say that the 80%, if not 90% of the challenge of development is not about building schools and hospitals and stuff. It's about how do you change what's in here? How do you change mindsets and behaviors? How do you change a human heart? How? That's really the challenge of the last mile delivery. Not only the geographic reach, but actually how do you change behaviors? Come back to Jeffrey Sachs. So I was chatting with one of our Tier Fund's vice presidents, one of the people who does lots of, a chap called Michael Hastings, wonderful man. And he was reflecting on the Millennium Villages project, of which he is very much involved, which is this actually initiative that was set up by Jeffrey Sachs. And it's in the middle of being assessed at the moment by DFID under the Independent Commission on Aid Impact. So DFID have been funding it, and they now want to say, well, what impact have we seen? And of course, they're looking at very crunchy things like schools and education and literacy and so on, and health and nutrition and those very crunchy, which of course, good things to look at. But Jeff Sachs said in passing, we're measuring the wrong thing here. The real thing we should be measuring is confidence. People's confidence. Again, that's Jeff Sachs's way of saying it's about changing human hearts. It's about giving people purpose, hope, meaning. That's the key to sustainability, to reach. Do you get it? Do you see? Now, Jeff Sachs is saying this, the architect of the Millennium Development Goals. He wasn't saying this 15 years ago. He's saying it now. Confidence. How do we measure confidence? How do we get confidence? Sorry, just one other thing before I move on there. How many local churches are there in the world? Now, I think some of you know this answer because I was preached here a few months ago and I told you what I thought the answer was. I said, look, I don't know, I haven't been out counted them, but people have estimated it to be about 9 or 10 million local churches. Local churches are the largest grassroots civil society network in the world. Shouldn't we be working through them? If it's all about this last mile of doing it, it's all about loving communities. If local community is the key to sustainability, if it's the place where people learn about relationships, where relationships are made real, where people discover hope, meaning and purpose, shouldn't we keep the local churches, that network of 9 million, front and center in everything we're doing? Shouldn't we? Especially we're in one, too. 9 million local churches. Rick Warren likes to draw a map. And he shows Rwanda, and he says, here in Rwanda there are, on the western Rwanda, he says, how many hospitals do you think there are? He says, I hear the hospitals, there's 3 of them serving millions of people. He said, how many rural health clinics do you think there are? I think there's 23 or something, and he puts them on the map, they appear. And he says, how many local churches do you think there are here? And at close to 1,000 local churches appear in this piece, a few thousand. They're everywhere. Last mile of delivery. Remember these questions. So why there's this missing ingredient? Let's just quickly think, very quickly. Why do we miss this ingredient, which of course is grassroots civil society with the local church at the heart of it? But the world for years really only sees 2 things. As I have journeyed and watched the development, the professional development discourse, really all the debate surrounds 2 actors. The role of the enabling state, governments on the right, and the role of business and enterprise on the left. And of course, these have vital roles to play. The state does some fantastic work at delivering physical outcomes. Immunization drives, aspects of healthcare. Sometimes they can be quite good at education too, but actually education is pretty tough to do well in Africa. It's quite tough to do well in the UK. Economic enterprise, economic needs being met, essential part of the ingredient. And they play a vital role. Dynamic private sector. There's no question when we look at Asia that economics has had a massive effect on the poorest in terms of their economic livelihoods. Remember the goal. Who, though, do these 2 sectors meet the relational needs of anybody? Where are the relational needs met? It's not in the gift of government to meet the relational needs. It's not in the gift of economic and the private sector really to meet relational needs, except indirectly. And the problem is we keep missing this 3rd ingredient, this 3rd vital actor, empowered civil society. And of course, the local church is at the heart of civil society. It's the heart of everything. It's an empowered civil society. It's in community. It's in relationships. It's in the kind of cohesive bridging social capital at community level where relational needs are met, where we're loved, where we rediscover hope, meaning, and purpose in our lives, and where we are in a loving community that helps meet those relational needs of those emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs are met. Empowered grassroots civil society is this missing ingredient, and the local church is at the heart of it. It is the largest piece of it. One of the problems is we often see civil society as the big NGOs. It's not the big NGOs or the denominational church structures. 95% of civil society is at the grassroots. It's the myriad of community-level organizations, and especially those 10 million local churches that are at the bedrock of community, of grassroots civil society. The problem is it's messy working with grassroots. So that's why governments don't really like working with it, because it's fragmented. And who do you talk to? And it's messy, and it takes a long time. Again, just to give you another example of the power of the local church. The potential of the local church. So in Ethiopia, one of the most exciting programs we're involved in, started about 10 years ago, was one of my colleagues took a local church leader in Ethiopia to go and see some self-help group work in India. He came back and had a massive vision saying, we've got to take this to our churches and empower them to set up local self-help groups, because self-help groups, if you teach women how to save, don't even give them any money, just teach them how to save, amazing things happen. Now, so 10 years later, there are now 12,000 self-help groups across Ethiopia, spread through the churches. 12,000. And these local churches, all we've done with them is taken them on a journey to understanding what the Bible teaches equipped them and taught people how to save. We haven't even given them any money. We just taught them how to save. Well, the church taught them how to save. And now there's 12,000 of these self-help groups. I haven't got time to tell you what stunning things are going on. But just the DFID, Department for International Development, in country, have been fascinated by this program. Because essentially it is providing the most effective, not the perfect, but the most effective social safety net in Ethiopia at the moment. Because it's focused on and it's replicable, and it's totally sustainable. It's totally undependent on any outside provision, and it's growing and growing and growing. And it is meeting the whole of human need, not just economic need. Okay, and the potential is phenomenal. So just in closing, so briefly, I preached here, as I said, a few months ago. And I spoke very much around the local church. And I picked that Acts 2 chapter. I said, let's imagine, have we lost confidence in the power of the gospel to transform the world the way it did in the Roman times? Have we lost confidence today? Do we need to rediscover that confidence today? Bring it back front and center stage? Wrestle with the local church? And I spoke about the 3 big lessons I took away from the early local church as depicted in the book of Acts, was that within this local church, you saw whole life transformation. Yeah? You saw the whole of human need being met. You saw a goal that was biblical in terms of human transformation being realized. Number 1. Number 2, you saw astonishing sustainability, but supernatural sustainability. And thirdly, you saw astonishing reach. Again, just think how fast local churches transformed the Roman Empire with no outside provision, with no tier fund or DFID to help them on their way. So just a couple of minutes in closing, what this means for us. I offer these simply as thoughts, maybe just to take into today and take in hang on. There we go. These are just thoughts to mull on. Firstly, who's the hero of the story? Are we the heroes? We gallantly go out and save lives. Are we allowing our needs, maybe assuaging guilt or wanting to see stuff and report back, or the pressure of a back donor, whose needs are being met? Who are the heroes? And whose resources dominate? That's what I love about these local churches that I see on every trip now. They are the heroes. It's their resources, 95%, it's their resources that are making the difference, and God. And it is their needs that are prioritized, that are predominate. So who are the heroes? Whose resources? Our resources are still needed. But we need some humility. We need to see how what we bring is multiplied up or complements what they bring. We need to really be mindful and externalize what we're bringing into the conversation. Thank you. Second, to whom are we accountable? This is a big challenge for us as a development organization or as a mission organization. Is my primary accountability to the donor or to you, people who so generously support the work? Well, yes, I am, but I have to admit, we increasingly believe our primary accountability is to those 3 women there. It's the people we serve. It's to them I feel accountable most. I want to know what they think. I want to know what they believe. I want to know whether they think I've done a good job. So when we go, how are we truly empowering and releasing and encouraging and working in a way that enables the communities we serve to tell us what they think, and especially what they think of us, in a way that it is not tainted by, well, I better be nice to them, otherwise they might not come again. or they might not give me any more money. Thirdly, how do we love and accompany the local church? Not do to, not deliver through, not say, here's the package, you take it off the shelf. We're all in local churches. Would we want that done to us? No, how do we love and accompany the local church? See it and recognizes it's a mess, because all local churches are to some degree a mess, but recognizes that, as Bill Hybels loves to say, the local church is the hope of the world. This is the plan. How do we love and raise up and lift and bless and accompany the local church and learn from it? And see it. We often don't even see the local church when we turns up because it's invisible, or it's underground, or it's too slow, or it's just too difficult. So let's just do it ourselves. But until we embrace it and raise up God's vision of what the local church is capable of, well, that's what we need to do. Raise our ambition and confidence. We must embrace a far longer time span. That's one of the things we're really learning. So often we want to go in, build the school, do the thing, do the water pump, get out, we've done our job. The business, if 90% of development is about changing hearts and minds, how long did it change you? How long did it take me to change my heart and mind? I look at my children. It takes years. These processes of accompanying churches and communities to embrace the gospel and allow the word of God to transform hearts and minds and then support them as they begin, it takes, I'm afraid, years. We're mostly having to have a sort of more of a 3-4 year time span before we really begin to see fruit. Sometimes it's quicker. We need to think longer. In our approach, we must prioritizing listening, learning, walking with humility. I think it's the biggest skill we all need to cultivate. How do we listen to those we're serving? How do we learn from them? How do we walk with humility with them? And finally, we need to rediscover our confidence, refresh, dust off our confidence in the gospel. To transform lives, to transform hearts, to transform and change communities, to bring hope, meaning, and purpose in people's lives. That's what we believe. So let's bring it front and center stage to our efforts to tackle poverty and injustice too. Amen. Can I just pray? And then Andy. Heavenly Father, I just ask that you would help us do just that. You would increase our confidence in your gospel, in a relationship with Jesus to change hearts and minds, and help us to have the wisdom to bring this front and center stage to everything we're doing, to serve the poorest, to confront injustice in your world today. Amen.
Matt, or Matthew rather. One question before you go, which is maybe an obvious one. You may have been asked this before. What if there isn't a local church?
So it's a great question, and it's one I'm very often asked. So my first answer would be, let's not say because of that question, therefore we will ignore the local church. My first thing is to say, there are 9 million local churches in the world, so why don't we kind of focus on them and make sure they're doing a good job as well? So that would be the first thing. The second thing I'd say is, when I go to Asia, if I take Cambodia, where there were no local churches, most of Tearfun's work there now is funding church planting movements. That was Mensaret's story. I didn't get a chance to say, but essentially, in summary, we went and did something. This man was so inspired, the community was so challenged that they came to Christ. They planted a church, and the first thing they wanted to do was to go out and do the same in the next village. And when I arrived, 25 churches had been planted, 400 people had been baptized the week before, and this work was spreading. The third thing is to say that in countries where it's really tough, so I've worked in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and when I was there, we were deeply challenged and deeply sought to live in a way that was always making the gospel visible. There's no way I could have preached but I lived in a way, very intentionally, very prayerfully, where people were encountering Jesus in what we did and how we lived. And there's one amazing story, which I can't tell, where basically one of our staff members, that was the start of his faith journey, just encountering us. Seeds start small, but they must start and they must be planted. So,
Matthew, thank you very much. That's a brilliant start to our conference. A hand for Matthew. Thank you.